Hey guys, welcome to another episode here on Thelearningdroid. I just thought I'd show a little bit of the prep I use before I do some pyrography. It all depends on the kinds of wood you're using. Today we're going to be using model shop bought pre-cut pieces of obishi and basswood, as I still have some left. These are just sort of test patterns I'm working on at the moment. They're not for anyone in particular, so of course they're available if you want them. We've got two patterns. We've got an owl, and then we've got a pagan style religious symbol. It's a pentagram within the four symbols of elements and the symbol of spirit. First off, just to head anything off, it does start. I'm not religious. I'm an atheist. However, I have a lot of pagan friends, and that popped up as something to do. So, the first thing you have to think about is you have to cut your wood down to size. Base rule, measure twice, cut once. Personally, I prefer measure 3,500 times, but still. So what we're going to be using is we're going to be using, as they're quite small patterns, a metal ruler. You don't need a tape measure because they're quite small patterns. We're going to be using a Kumagoro Japanese ice bear saw. It's a Kumagoro blade. It's exceedingly sharp and exceedingly good at cutting fine through wood. However, we're also going to be using a pair of these to support the wood up, and one of them is going to be underneath the actual cutting point as a sacrificial piece. Basically, it just helps to stop the ripping, because with store-bought pieces like this, you do tend to get a little bit of ripping on the back side of the cut if you're not careful. What else we're going to use? We're going to be using a right angle mark, which has been tucked away somewhere. Oh where have you gone? I will find that in a second, guys, and we'll move on to the actual cutting. Found it, guys. This is a right angle marker. Absolutely completely forgotten the name, doesn't matter. You can get them from most shops. Basically, they're designed so that when you place them up and fix them across here, it does a perfect right angle for you to work on. So first things first, we need to know the size of our patterns. So let's have a look. I actually measured these up before I printed them, but this pattern is approximately 3 inches wide and about 4.5 inches high, 4.5 inches tall. So we'll do probably a 5-inch deep piece of obishi. So how much have we got on here? We have 10.5 inches, so we can take it off this quite happily. So what we need is we need a little pencil for marking, or a little pen, doesn't really matter. Usually use a pencil because then you can replace the marks. Here's the pencil. For cutting these, you can also use these little craft blades that you put into a craft handle, but it just takes a very long time with the harder woods like basswood. So let's have a look. So you can already tell there's a little bit of tearing on this one because I didn't have an underblock last time I cut it. So we'll measure off about 5 inches. So there is. Would help if I did it the right way around. So there is our 5-inch mark, and a 5-inch mark. You can do it literally right here. And the advantage with this particular tool is we just pop her on. If we get this out from underneath. And this gives us pretty much a straight 90-degree angle, because pressed right up against here we have a nice angled surface to work off. I'm going to do the same with the basswood. Make sure I'm not using the bit with the sticker on it. So we find out the size of our pattern. We are about 3.5 by 3.5. So as the basswood's 4 inches thick, or 4 inches wide, sorry, not 4 inches thick. That would be slightly weird unless I was doing a cube. So as it's 4 inches wide, we'll just whack off a 4-inch. And you might think, well, he's using this lovely little tool, so why is he marking both sides? Well, I just like to check, because sometimes if you only have one mark, what you can do is you can have it tilted slightly and you don't really realise. So we make sure it's nice up and tight against there. The two marks roughly line up reasonably accurately. So we go straight across, like so. So then we have to move on to cutting. As I said, you can use this sort of blade to cut. It's a nice little blade, usually designed for cutting balsa wood and things like that for model making crafts. But it will go through this sort of wood, it just takes a long time. So instead of that, what we're going to be using is we're going to be using the ice bear. There's a greater risk of ripping out with the ice bear saw, simply because it's bigger, it's got larger teeth. But as long as you've got a piece of wood underneath that you don't mind ruining, speaking of which, these pieces of wood are a tad big. Tell you what I'll do. I flip it round like that. Now, knuckle of my thumb, keeping my tip of my thumb back and the skin back. Line it up. Make sure the blade's nice and vertical. Draw it back. Try not to get it tugged. Clamping the wood in place is really good idea most of the time. There we go, nearly no ripping out on the back because we've got this piece underneath. Another thing I did to help cut down on the amount of ripping on the back is, rather than doing full length strokes with the saw, small strokes backwards and forwards to help keep the rips small. And there we go, we have a nice little 4x4, 4-inch by 4-inch piece of basswood. And then all we do to cut the obishi is exactly the same thing. Place it on, and with this one there's even less risk of ripping out because it actually covers the entire underside. And it really does have to be a sacrificial piece of wood, because you notice I've already got cut marks in it, but the whole point is it's there simply to make it less likely that I rip out the back. And with obishi you really do have a problem with ripping out the back unless you're using a very fine blade or you've got a piece of sacrificial wood underneath. There we go, we've got our nice little piece of obishi. So, get rid of the spare bits. And get rid of my sacrificial piece of wood. You notice two slight cuts in the top. So, the rest of the preparation of our Obishina basswood. We don't really need a huge amount of sanding because it's pre-sanded from the shop. It's pre-prepared from the shop for most model making tasks. However, a little bit of sanding with 400 or 600 grit, just to smooth it out slightly. Does not go amiss. These little edge bits, if you just run a sanding, the slight ripping at the back, just run a sanding block very gently over that edge. You can take these slight, if you can see the little rips, just run a sanding block very gently over there, always moving with the grain. See, we take them out so that they go away. Slight angle to one of those cuts which happened before, because I actually cut it at an angle intentionally. Once again, slight ripping. I'm just going to sand that very gently with 400 grit, nothing really much rougher than 400 grit. Sand it very gently just to get those rips to go away. Once again, with the basswood, nice little bit of sanding with 400 grit on top. And again, in line with the grain of the wood. See, I can already tell the difference between that side which has been sanded and that side which isn't. You can even hear the difference. That side is much rougher because it hasn't been sanded yet. So we just do a quick sand with 400 grit paper. I find 400 grit to be best for pyrography because it just takes the edge off the grain. Rougher grit than that can leave scratches and can leave slight sort of variations that can affect your pyrography. But I find 400 grit to be best. So, that was the Learning Droid, guys. That was prepping some wood before we do some pyrography. Hope you enjoyed.